This presentation focuses on the Common Core State Standards Assessment with an emphasis on the need, the consortium, and the assessment itself. First, we begin with the need. One element identified relating to need is the notion that high school freshmen are not graduating at a high enough rate. For the last 8-10 years, we seem to have flatlined at around 73% in terms of the graduation rate. The intentions behind the reauthorization of ESEA, with the current iteration being NCLB, included an emphasis on increasing graduation rates. Another area of need is what happens to students when they leave high school and how they leave high school. Out of every 20 high school freshmen, we see that 6 are going to drop out, 6 are work-bound, taking on menial kinds of jobs, and 8 become college freshmen. Of those college freshmen, only 2 end up securing high skills and high wage occupations after graduation. The remainder end up as dropouts and or are unemployed. Further need is demonstrated by our English language learner proficiency rates, and we see that the gap continues to grow instead of diminishing. There's a huge emphasis in the world of education to improve each of these areas. Additionally, in the 21st century, there are expectations for what students should be able to do when they leave high school. These include having a broad and strong foundation in multiple subject academic areas, also having very specific learning and and innovation skills. There's an emphasis on creativity, on communication and collaboration, critical thinking and problem solving. There's an expectation that students are globally aware, that they are civically literate, that they are prepared to be engaged citizens who vote and make a positive difference in the world, that they're health conscious, and that they have some basic knowledge about financial, economic, and entrepreneurial literacy. All of these features combined together with the National Governors Association a number of years ago, resulting in Common Core State Standards. The assessment is going to be managed by a consortium. Some of the questions that we'll address regarding this consortium include what a consortium is, which one we belong to, characteristics of the summative assessment, some terms that you may want to know, and what the sample test items look like. California belongs to the Smarter Balanced Assessment Consortium, and this is a voluntary grouping of states that have decided to pool their resources to create next generation assessments in alignment with the Common Core State Standards, which essentially are national standards. The assessment itself, a number of questions we may want to answer include what will be measured. There are 2 categories of standards that are going to be measured. One are those college and career readiness standards, which are inferred in those 21st century learning standards that were identified earlier, as well as content standards in grades kindergarten through 12. Excuse me. Some additional vocabulary words that you'll want to pay attention to include the word claims, assessment targets, and cognitive rigor matrix. Claims are broad statements about what students are going to be able to do in a given content area. When it comes to literacy, there are 5 broad claims. The first you can see says students can read closely and critically to comprehend a range of increasingly complex literary and informational texts. The others you can read on your own. The idea is that the standards are specific within a grade level to support each of these claims. The standards in kindergarten are going to look different than they do in grade 12. However, each grade level contributes to these claims. The assessment targets relate to the standards that relate to these claims. In language arts, there are standards that have been developed based on levels of cognitive rigor or depth of knowledge. There are 4 levels as compared with Bloom's 6 levels. And you'll see level 1 says recall and reproduction. Level 2 is skills and concepts. Level 3 is strategic thinking, and level 4 is extended thinking. Level 1 standards in language arts, about 7% of them are level 1, about 12% are level 2, 55% level 3, 26% level 4. This means that over 80% of the standards are levels 3 and 4. Think about that being all upper half of Bloom's taxonomy as a point of comparison. Just like language arts, math also has claims. There are 4 claims in math, including, for example, communicating reasoning, claim number 3, the idea that students can clearly and precisely construct viable arguments to support their own reasoning and to critique the reasoning of others. You can check out the other ones here. Just like with language arts, the standards are based on these depth of knowledge levels. You'll notice in math that about 21% are level 1, 54% are level 2, 20% are level 3, 5% are level 4. While these comments relate to the standards and not specifically the assessment, the recommendation to the Smarter Balanced Assessment Consortium, to which California belongs, has been that the assessments directly reflect the standards. So in math, if 20% of the math standards are at level 3, strategic thinking, then theoretically 20% of the assessment will also address level 3 in terms of depth of knowledge. The cognitive rigor matrix is reflected in this matrix identified on this slide, and this is based further on the work of Willard Daggett and his rigor and relevance framework. The intention is that educational experiences move from quadrant A, which is lower level thinking and restricted basically to classroom application, up to quadrant D, where it's higher level thinking, creative, innovative, and relevant to the real world. You'll notice 4 columns of verbs, and just like with Bloom's taxonomy, the verbs indicate the level of thinking that's intended with a given implementation level of a standard. So, what are some of the features of this next generation assessment that students are going to be taking? First of all, interim or benchmark assessments are being provided. There's a large library of assessment items. These will be optional and will be determined by school districts whether or not they're going to be used. The assessments, the summative assessments, will be given during the last 12 weeks of the school year, which is a large testing window, and it will include a combination of both computer and human-scored performance tasks, and there will also be an end-of-year assessment. The performance tasks are the mandatory components for participation in the Smarter Balanced Assessment Consortium, also known as SBAC. Reading, reading, writing, and math are the 3 areas. There will be an option for districts to choose the end-of-year assessment as well, which will be based on 40 to 65 questions of a variety of types. You'll notice that they are technology enhanced. The idea of using computer adapted technology to provide differentiation in the test questions is a big component, and artificial intelligence will be a large component of the scoring of the assessments. You see here a sample of a question specification slide, and this supports one of those language arts claims. As you scroll through it, you'll notice a standard that's identified as well as an assessment target. The assessment target reflects directly the standards that are listed. Depth of knowledge here is level 2, moderate difficulty level, and then you can continue on to see some specific information. These specs will be provided with the standards-based questions as the assessments are further developed. The assessments will be offered in grades 3 through 8 as well as grade 11 in high school. As mentioned before, there will be a 12-week window with a retake option. Schools will receive scores 2 to 3 weeks after the original tests are taken. They may then work with students to determine if some students should retake the test. Higher scores are the ones that are retained. Computer adaptive technology allows for differentiation. For example, if you answer an easy question correctly, then you'll be given a more challenging one. And there also will be a variety of item types, including short answer, constructed response, selected response, etc. As mentioned before, students in grades 3 through 8 and grade 11 will be the ones who take this exam. This offers a summary of the Smarter Balanced Assessment Consortium plan. It identifies those interim assessments that are optional, as well as the digital library that supports them with all kinds of questions. You see listed the performance assessment tasks and events in reading, writing, and math. That's the mandatory piece. And then the end of year assessment, which is optional, and districts may choose to make it a requirement within the district. The SBAC, or Next Generation Assessment Timeline, looks like this. Currently, 2011-12, CSTs and high school exit exam are still in place. In 2012-13, the Next Generation assessments will be piloted. No feedback will be given on scores to schools. And then in 2013-14, there will be field testing. And finally, 2014-15 is when the assessments will actually be implemented for real. Who's paying for this? U.S. Department of Ed through a $330 million support to the two consortia. One is referred to as PARC. It's the Partnership for Assessment of Readiness for College and Careers. And the other one is the one that we belong to, which is Smarter Balanced Assessment Consortium. The intention is to develop this valid, reliable, and fair system of next generation assessments. You see here a sample assessment item, and as you read through it, you'll see that there are two people, Phil and Kathy. They want to raise money for charity by making these wooden toys. Phil's going to carve them, Kathy's going to decorate them. And at the end of this, you see they have limited amount of time. They want to maximize the amount of money that they make for their charity, and they want to figure out how many of each type of toy to make in order to maximize the amount of money that they make for charity. A lot for students to think about. This is an example of a short answer item representing claim number 2 in mathematics. And there will be a lot for teachers and administrators to think about in terms of preparing students for this sort of an assessment item. The sorts of things they need to think about are the math skills, the thinking processes, the perseverance that's necessary, as well as the ways that students can learn to be metacognitive in their approach to test questions. You may want to think about which level from the cognitive rigor matrix this kind of a question might relate to. As mentioned before, the first next generation assessment takes place in the year 2015, which means that this year's kindergartners are going to be the first students to experience nothing but Common Core assessment. And as folks start gearing up for this, you'll notice that assessment is a key component in the implementation plan. And to prepare for assessment, folks will need to think about the kind of teaching that needs to take place, what student learning will look like so that you can predict whether students will be successful on the assessments, what sort of adult learning needs to take place, and also what sorts of tools, technology and otherwise, will be needed in order to make a successful transition to this new assessment form. I know for me, as I've been learning about Smarter Balanced Assessment Consortium and the next generation assessments that are being developed, I have a lot of questions. You may have some too. Some of the ones that I've thought about are, what's going to happen to the California standards tests in history, social science, and science? What exactly is meant by a next generation assessment? What will be needed in terms of technology? How will English learners and students with special needs be accommodated? And what's the difference between the two consortia? You probably have a whole bunch of questions yourself. As we end, there are a few references that were used in this presentation that you may want to be aware of. They're credible references and credible sources for you to turn to for additional information on this topic. This ends this presentation on Common Core state assessments, a quick introduction.